Okay, welcome to everyone who is following the streaming from this webinar. This is the second talk from a series of webinars. Most of the speakers are part of our international advisory board, and the talk today is water scarcity and water security, a Chilean and California perspective in a global context. So we will start in just a minute. But before doing that, I will give a very warm welcome to both rock stars in hydrology, Professor Jan Hodmans and Professor Eduardo Hopsafel. Professor Hodmans will deliver a talk for 25-30 minutes, and after that we will have time for a couple of questions from us, but also we will collect questions from the viewers. So Professor Hodmans is Professor Emeritus of Badot's-Zone Hydrology at the University of California, Davis. His research and teaching focus on soil hydrology, irrigation, water, and nutrient management, and climate change impacts on California hydrology. He has about 200 peer-reviewed publications in soil science and water resources journals. He's also fellow of the Soil Science Society of America, also the American Geophysical Union and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS. He was the chair of the Department of Land, Air, and Water Resources and chief editor of the Badot's-Zone Journal. And since 2009, he served as associate dean of the College of Agricultural and Environmental Science. But also he was the director of the CAES International Program from 2015 to 2018. He was the president of the Soil Science Society of America, and he also served as the interim associate vice provost of global affairs in 2015, and he was the interim director of the UC Davis World Food Center in 2016. He is now retired from the University of California, and he retired as distinguished professor in 2018. So I give the floor to Professor Hodmans. We will keep our cameras down, Professor Hopsafel and I. So in that way, Professor Hodmans can share the screen and start the presentation. And we will see again in 25, 30 minutes. The floor is yours, Professor.
Okay. So here is my first slide. Just say the okay sign if everything is fine.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Well, thanks. Thank you all, Eduardo and Diego, for introducing me. It's a great pleasure to make a presentation for you all back there. I apologize already if the presentation might not be as smooth as possibly I could, because this is really my first Zoom presentation today. So it also, the subcontext, the title is Water Scarcity and Water Security. I have a subcontext of looking at Chile and California as well. However, given the time, this might be fairly brief. So let me introduce myself. I'm a soil scientist. I had my degrees in soil science and hydrology. Very much a soil scientist. It's also intriguing to just reflect on the relevance of soils when I talk about soils with non-soil scientists, how it controls the food we eat, the water we drink, the air we breathe, etc. And it has so many other functions, and some of them are detailed below here in the corner. It's also surprising, intriguing to look at the similarities between soil and human health. Again, it's a little bit of a sidebar, But when we talk about human health, we know we are told to have a diverse diet, not eat or drink too many foreign substances. So we build a nice micro ecosystem in our gut and in body, so we can live a healthy life with the microbes fighting diseases and so on. Well, the same you can say about soil health. Soils, in order to be productive, they need to have a very diverse, active microbial population. And also they provide for resilience, for productive agriculture, resilience against climate change and droughts and so on. So health and soil health and human health are very much alike. Now, as a soil scientist, I've been very disciplinary for the most of my career. However, as I started to be more involved broadly in the sciences, it became important for me to work with other disciplines and to bring soils to bear in other related disciplines. So for example, you see here a brief that we wrote not too long ago, actually, on what's called water smart agriculture. And this was done through the America's Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, INCA, which is located in Costa Rica. And so they focus on agriculture development and human and rural well-being, mostly in countries where this is relevant, particularly in Central America, but also other countries like Chile is a member of this institution, of this organization. And so here I laid out, the relevance of soils and how you manage soils, so you can be smart in make effective use of water in soils, the soil water storage. Actually, as it states here, pretty soon, actually, there's going to be a 50-page report or so along the same line, but will be a lot more explicit about what water smart agriculture. Okay, enough about me. Let's look at water and the topic of this seminar. So it's important to realize, and I assume most of you are aware of this, that to produce crops takes a lot of water. For rain-fed agriculture, this is typically the water that's stored in the soil through rain, which is called the green water. But for many other areas, more the semi-arid and the arid areas, and you see them in blue pretty much on one of the graphics on the screen, they rely on what's called the blue water. This is water that is extracted from lakes, streams, or groundwater. And so groundwater being a very important role, it says here like about 30%. Now, this blue water is very important, this irrigation. And it says here about 50% of agriculture is irrigated, yet it produces 45% of the global food production. And so particularly the high value foods like fruits and vegetables. Well, so when we look at water use trends, we're really typically looking at blue water use trends. Okay, so this is the water that is extracted from the surface and groundwater. And you see on the graphic on the left, the trends in the last, 100 years about total water use in the world. And so you see that, and it says it over there, that over the last 100 years or so, that blue water extraction has increased sixfold, predominantly through agriculture. At the same time, you also notice over the time, that these 100 years, that industrial use and domestic use, particularly for sanitation and drinking water, has increased as well. And in fact, as it states here, the agriculture fraction of total water use has really decreased. And early last century was 90%, now it's only about 2/3 of the total water use is agriculture, which of course is still a lot of water. particularly in Chile, and that says here in the last, what is it, 15 years or so, also there, freshwater use and extraction has increased quite a bit, 13% it states, but mostly for the industry. I'm sure you know the copper mining and so on, and of course for drinking water. Okay. So this brings me then to the definition of water scarcity, and this is a definition that was, there are various definitions. This one was defined by the World Economic Forum, and it really looks at water scarcity as a way that's a lack of freshwater resources to meet the standard water demand, and it actually can be quantified by looking at the ratio of water that is consumed versus of water that is extracted. Water is extracted versus the water that is available. So if you're looking at this diagram over here, you see that there is different levels of water scarcity. From about 10 to 20% to about extremely high to 75 or higher percent. So that means that 75% means that 75% from the available surface or groundwater is really extracted for use, particularly for agriculture. Now, typically it varies not only geographically, as you see on the map, but also in time. So the mismatch between demand and availability can depend on many factors, including, of course, droughts or maybe even pollution. So you might have water, but that water is not safe to use. Okay. So there is a water quantity factor, and there is the lack of access to safe water, which is more a quality factor. It affects many people in the world. There's here some statistics over here. At least it says here 3 billion people at least suffer from water scarcity 1 month of every year. Let's look at the other slide, and it tells you a little bit more about what water scarcity is and how it's what types of water scarcity there are. So it distinguishes between 2 types of water scarcity. Physical water scarcity, meaning that more than 75% of the river flows are allocated to different sectors, particularly in agriculture. And so there is just not much water around. Then there is what's called the economic water scarcity, and these are the countries here that are mostly in green, which is in sub-Saharan Africa dominantly, and some in Southeast Asia, where there is plenty of water, except it's just not accessible, it's just not available. Okay, there's no infrastructure to bring the water to the people. So looking at these numbers, roughly almost half the world population suffer from some degree of water scarcity. And when I say some degree of water scarcity, there is a standard, which is on the bottom over here, defined by the UN. When the animal water supplies drop below 1,000 cubic meter per person, which is about 3,500 liters per day per person. I'm sorry, per year. Then there is some degree of water scarcity. So that number is important to remember, the 1,000 cubic meter per person year. So here we're looking at the water scarcity and how it is distributed in Chile. And so this is data that comes from the World Bank that I found. And the top graph on the left shows for about 15 different regions in Chile, the water availability in cubic meter person per year. Remember, the 1,000 is the one that is the kind of the standard. And so you notice that there's quite a distribution, of course, with low water availability numbers in the northern regions and huge numbers in the southern region of Chile. And notice this is a log scale, okay? So 10,000 and 1,000 are, that means it's 10 times larger, okay? Looking at the bottom graph, then you see the disconnect for the same regions between the water demand and supply, and not surprisingly, the demand to the red bars is outnumbering the supply, particularly in the northern regions, whereas southern Chile, the supply is way larger than the demand. So there is an enormous surplus of water in Chile as a country, okay? But it varies enormously between the different regions. So can you cope? Some examples. How can you cope with water scarcity? And so well, it's a ratio between availability and demand. So one way is to increase availability, and so you can do that to increase the water use efficiency, okay? Increase the water productivity, more crop per drop, as it's called. Desalinize water, recycle water, reduce water pollution, because that water then becomes more useful. Increase water storage, storage in reservoirs or in groundwater. And so a good example is here in California, where in the 50s and 60s, last century, enormous infrastructures were built to move water from the northern part. In this case, it's just the mirror image of Chile, from the northern part of California through all these aqueducts and other systems down to the valley and to Southern California, also for drinking water and like in the Los Angeles area. So, so increase of water storage, reservoirs there are a huge number of reservoirs in California that were built over time. And then of course you can import water across the country, across countries or between districts, boundaries. Okay, so move water around, like the example I just spoke about. Now you can also, of course, then reduce the demand. So how can you can do that? Well, there are various ways as well. We just talked about blue water and green water. So if we encourage rain-fed agriculture, so be more efficient in using the water stored in the soil, then that means there will be less need for developed water from the reservoirs or from the streams. An important consideration is also what is called virtual water. Particularly countries that have not as much agriculture, they import foods, people that are regions or countries that are water stressed could reduce export of produce, and so that would save in that way a lot of water. And so this is called virtual water, and I'll talk a little bit more about in later. One can change the diet. It's very clear that plant-based protein diets use a lot less water, almost maybe like a magnitude, order of magnitude than animal-based proteins. Can change cropping patterns, use less water for irrigation and change to higher value crops, reduce post-harvest losses in the industry, a huge factor. And you can reallocate water between sectors towards higher value use. And so, an example could be in Chile between the mining and agriculture. I don't know all the details, but obviously there's a lot of competition between the sectors in terms of water use. Okay, so one of the other the examples I mentioned in the previous slide was to be more efficient and more productive. And so, as an example, as a soil scientist, we talk about water smart agriculture and climate smart agriculture, where we optimize rainfall and store it in the soil. So if it's efficiently used that way, there is less developed water that is required. And at the same time, through climate smart agriculture, in addition to water smart, you can adapt and build resilience to climate change. At the same time, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So whatever that means in total is that you improve soil and water management practices. So you can do that in different ways. Obviously, soil organic matter is extremely important. We talked about the microbial diversity as a result of that. You know, building resilience for, against drought, integrated nutrient management practices, and you know, legumes is a very important consideration. Of course, increase irrigation water and nitrate use efficiency, reduce soil degradation, and particularly I'm talking about soil erosion and soil salinity, thereby impacting the environment. So I briefly talked about visual water use. So here you see a map that was published about 5 years ago that shows the export and import of water through the products that the countries are importing and exporting. And so in this case, the green colors are the countries that mostly export water through the trade, and the yellow and red colored countries are the countries that really import water that way. And so obviously in Americas, there's a lot of export in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, no, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. There's a lot of import of that virtual water. And if you look at the whole water footprint of the world, that virtual water actually accounts to about 20%. So there's enormous amounts of volumes of water that are moving around the world through import and export. Okay, that brings me then to the definition of water security. And here, this is a definition, and there are a number of different definitions, but they are very much alike. And this is the one by the UN, United Nations. And it focuses, let me see over here. It really, the definition is to safeguard for adequate quantities of water for sustainable livelihoods, for human well-being, for socioeconomic development, preserving ecosystems, all of these, so toward peace and political stability. So water is broadly needed and supports livelihoods in many different ways. So it is a more abstract definition. It's hard to quantify, but the different components that come in are fairly clear. You see also that in this diagram that there are these 4 different quadrants that relate to human well-being, the ecosystem function, the economic activities that are supported, particularly also that includes food, and then the resilience to unusual events, these like climate change or flooding and so on. And so, although they are separated over here, it's clear that they're all very much interconnected, and that really relates to the nexus that you hear a lot about, the food, water, energy, climate nexus. So you cannot just look at one component, they're all interrelated. The definition of water security probably was originally defined mostly because water and sanitation issues around the globe continues to be an issue. There are billions of people around the world that really don't have access to safe drinking water or have proper sanitation. And so, this is still at the forefront of water security. How can we make sure that in fact all the people have access to safe drinking water? Now, this is not the case in Chile. As I find out, even before the 1981 Water Code was institutionalized, already Chile at that time was working widely to ensure that the population in Chile had adequate sanitation and water, and you see that in the graph. and the right below corner. Okay, let me just briefly introduce a little bit of California so you understand where I'm coming from. You see the map of California over here. It's also very arid. It is the 5th largest economy in the world. Population is about 40 million. It grows about 50% of the fruits and vegetables for the US and Canada, and it's the #1 dairy state, so it's very water intensive. It has 10 million hectares of agricultural land, and of that, 37% is irrigated. So that comes out to be about 4 million hectares. For that, it requires about 27 billion cubic meter of developed water. So again, these are the reservoirs and groundwater that I talked about earlier. And surprisingly, that's about the same volume, if you understand it right, that is used for irrigation in Chile. State is also this state in the US with the most endangered ecological communities, both animal and plant. And climate warming is very clearly going on over here, and we all hear about the shortage of water supplies, the droughts, the forest fires that we are currently experiencing. So there is a lot going on, including improved management and regulation of water management in the state. Okay, so let's look at the water footprint in the world. And so remember, the water footprint is looking at the blue water available, or the blue water consumed by the people per year. And so remember, the scarcity value was about 1,000, and that's the red line, the arrow over here. And then you look, and so this diagram shows all the many different countries in the world. The USA you see on the right, which is actually very high. Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, to the left, has the lowest, because likely because of the huge amount of population. Looks like Saudi Arabia is also very high, which is very surprising because it's one of the most water scarce countries in the world. And so why are they, how do they manage to have so much fresh water available? Well, what they do is they pump the fossil groundwater, which is very much depleting in Arabia. And then they have been very keen in developing desalination. So they do have a lot of fresh water. Looking at Chile, and at the next slide we'll be focusing on Chile, but the consumption in Chile is about 35 billion cubic meter per year. Whereas the availability, it's 900 billion cubic meter. So again, there is just enormous discrepancy in some ways. There is a lot of water in Chile, but it's just not available in many places, particularly in the north, starting, Santiago up north. So then you see the blue box shows all the different commodities and sectors that use that water. And in fact, the bottom line is most of all of these, except two, which is domestic water supply and industry, they're all related to agriculture. Okay, so agriculture is the major water user, and not surprising. So here you see a blow up of Chile over here. And so this gives you the global use, the Chilean use of 1,200 cubic meter per person per year, as compared to the global average, which is 1,400. So we are over here. And so what I was saying is, if you're looking at this volume, everything, up to about 90% of the 1,200 is related to agriculture. So 90% of the water, at least on average, have been used in agriculture, but industrial use, including the mining, is a lot less, and it's only about this volume over here that I'm indicating, the size of the yellow circle. So Looking further to Chile, I have a few slides about Chile. And just to then put everything into context, since, like I said, since everybody in Chile pretty much has access to basic sanitation. But it also has the driest decade in history. And so you talk about the mega drought, which I expect is still ongoing. The country risks to experience the greatest water stress in the Western Hemisphere and puts its population at risk of water security. Okay, and then again, remember the definition of water security, how broad, the broad definition. Now, the glaciers provide immense volumes of water, but due to climate change, are in danger of slowly disappearing. And so that will affect not the total flow, but it will affect the seasonal flows. You know, so the spring flows will be a lot larger, and there will be much lower flows later during the year. But obviously there is a lot of water, whether it's climate change or not, that water will continue to be available. There are enormous water needs in Chile, despite, I remember the Santiago flooding a few years ago, which really affected water security for the city, because there was just limiting access to safe drinking water. So it's not only water quantity, but it's also water quality that needs to be considered. Chile, it's wrongly spelled. Water Code grants free water rights to private sector, limiting ability of government to control water management and regulation. So that is the 1981 code. There are many conflicts in the north of Chile, particularly between indigenous people and the mining companies, affecting about 1.5 million people. It includes depletion of fossil groundwater. So 1.5 million people, 20 million people roughly in Chile. Now we talk about averages water use. Well, because of the mega drought, it appears that in the past few years, the water availability has significantly been cut to near 30% of what's normal available. Now, of course, like in California, aqueducts that we built many years ago could provide irrigation water to the north. When I read in a report somewhere that it would cost about 10 to 30 billion US dollars to bring in irrigation water to the north to irrigate about 1 million hectare. Of course, there's a lot of controversy on that. Most other arid regions already built this structure either in colonial times or, like the example in California after the World War. This is not the case in Chile. The climate change is going to threaten the glacier's water supply, but remember, the precipitation will still be there, okay? So there will continue to be enormous water supplies in Chile. And actually, that's the next bullet point. The renewable water resource in Chile is 900 billion cubic meters per year, which is about 35,000 cubic meters per year per person, 10,000 liters per day per person. Okay, that's enormous. And remember the 1,000 cubic meter that I talked about in terms of the consumptive use, the threshold of being water scarce or not. This is 35 times larger. But there is, of course, the enormous variation between the regions, and it gives you the numbers over here, and they are related to the precipitation distribution in Chile, which is shown on the right-hand side of the map, varying from what? 8,000 millimeter per year to almost zero in the desert, in the Atacama Desert. Okay, the total freshwater use, and that's the total, was about, gave the number before, 35 billion cubic meter, with agriculture irrigation using 85% of that, okay? With mining, much less, it says here 9%. But looking at the 35 billion, that is still only less than 5% of the available freshwater in Chile. We talked earlier about the virtual water. It makes about 2 billion cubic meter in Chile. So it is very significant, and it's particularly the fruits and vegetables and the mining using that, by which that water is exported. I had a really hard time looking at the irrigation water use historically in Chile and how it is projected in the future. So that is just a question mark. So altogether then, the last few slides, Chile is, and this is no surprise, given the position Chile is in, is a real need for integrated, what's called integrated water resources management. It has been historically an increases consumptive use. It's in all sectors. It's creating conflicts already for a while. Water resources may decline. So to address that, key is to implement integrated water management. There was the 1981 Water Code that states that the water right holders are responsible for water management. That has resulted in so many water use associations within basins that it becomes very fragmented. So they do not necessarily function very well. There is overlapping responsibilities between competition in water use between the ministries. There's a lack of budget for public agencies. And I was surprised that maybe I knew to read that, but there's still a lack of citizen support for water policy. Moreover, it seems that surface and groundwaters are still independently managed, but no question, they must be considered together. We need to look at surface water, groundwater interactions. Both are storage, water storage, reservoirs, whether it's groundwater or surface water, and they interact together. So actions ongoing or in the future need to address all these different issues, without necessarily accounting on legislative changes to happen in the short term. I think when I heard Kelly's talk a few weeks ago, he said the same thing. I mean, you can wait forever. So communities need to take action. So most of this information in the slide I took from a colleague from Católica University, a paper by Donoso. Okay, so the suggestions for CREAM. Any strategy aiming at addressing the challenge of water security must be based on a thorough understanding of all elements of the water balance, including supply and demand for water and the spatial and temporal dimensions associated. So water accounting, so measurements. And so that brings me back to about 20 years ago here in California. There's no legislation or policy regarding contamination of groundwater by nitrate. And so at the time, the state Water Resource Control Board commissioned actually the university, UC Davis, to do an analysis of nitrogen use and fate in the state. And so that was called the UC Davis Nitrate Report. It caused a lot of consternation in the state, particularly by specific stakeholders, like, of course, the sector of agriculture. But it addressed the nitrate use and fate and how it would affect California's drinking water. And so what they did, and you see, look at that pie chart. On the left of that pie chart, it shows the fraction of nitrogen, where it comes from. And then we found out that 2/3 comes from fertilizers and roughly 1/3 from manure. But on the right-hand side, it shows where that nitrate winds up. And then they found out that only 1/3 of the nitrate that is applied to the land is actually taken up by the crop. 2/3, which is all the blue over here, is actually somehow moves into the atmosphere to nitrogen gas, greenhouse gas, or leaches to the groundwater. So this was very, so again, the point is there was information and data available, and from that then policy changes can happen. And so this led then in the early, a few years later, to a requirement of nitrogen tracking and reporting for farmers and coalitions. So these are kind of districts, which will eventually lead to permits as part of what is called the State's Irrigated Land Regulatory Program, ILRP. So again, it's a process, and right now we are in the middle of that process, but it all started with the data. Okay, so a few other suggestions. This is, I think, my last slide. There is a real need for transparency and trust and multi-stakeholder involvement across sectors. So, you know, if there is distrust, things are not going to move forward. Everybody needs to be on the same playing field. There must be consistent. There must be transparency, and all the stakeholders need to be involved. And then there's another suggestion that I was thinking of, and you know, if you know the International Panel of Climate Change, they have these scenarios that they built for different, what they call shared socioeconomic pathways. So what that means is, you say that, you know, let's just say that for the next 50 years, the economy and the politics will be like business as usual. Okay, so we just keep on going as we have been going. Or we will have a more sustainable pathway, or we have more like a rivalry pathway. That's, you know, we only care about our own country or our own basin. So this is the Make America Great Again, you know, kind of philosophy. So it's going to be very competitive. And then you look at different outcomes, okay? The population growth, the GDP, water demand, etc., food security, energy use, resilience and adaptability to extremes for these different scenarios. And that gives you then a framework that policy can maybe adapt it or change. And so this here is information I got from this Water Futures report that is listed over here. Okay, so this is it. I think my last point here is, so that's very clear, and I know CRIAM is working on this very much already. There's a very well-defined role for researchers and academics like CRIAM to expand its engagement at the science policy interface, possibly by using, you know, thinking about some of these suggestions that I made. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. And I'm happy to answer comments or questions.
Okay, thanks so much, Professor Holtmans, for such a good diagnosis of the current situation. Now we have to move to action very quickly, I think. Now we have some time for some discussion between our discussor here, Professor Hobsawell, and you, Professor Holtmans. And I think after maybe 10 minutes, we will go for some questions from the viewers. So, Professor Hobsawell, please, if you want to start the conversation.
Jan, was a very nice talking and real very important topics that you deal with, the very diversity aspect of the problem of the water related to Chile and California and in general in the world too. And one of the things that is to me very important and you like to put more emphasis, maybe I will explain something and then we can go on the discussion maybe with the support of Dr. Rivera. And you mentioned that, but it's very important, the soils, and for our studies and our students normally, we're explained that the deeply analysis of the soils is important for any type of irrigation systems. The people believe that if you put irrigation like drip irrigation and so on, it's not necessary to know very well the soils. But for us, and you mentioned there that is an important topics that people doesn't take in account. And another, this one is one thing that we'd like to know more about your very wild experience related with the irrigation management and soil situations and conditions for crops production. And the other thing that is our smart agro. This is, to me, is some topics that you mentioned is very important, and to point out that is not a unique type of analysis, and it's not the magic formula for anyone. Then the diversity must be taken into account to analyze our smart agro. That this is the point, is very important point, because the people sometimes try to copy some aspect related from one country to another, or going to some another country to take some experience and then apply it here, and doesn't work. And to know that the people is important to mention. Yeah? Another thing that I like to mention that maybe is a little bit controversy, or a little bit different than you explain in your talking, is related with the use efficiency at the farm levels. For us, we are studying a lot about the efficiency. Now, we have with Diego and other researchers some analysis of these topics, and we found that the efficiency at the farm level is good for the farm and improve the sustainability of the farm, but related with the basin analysis doesn't save any water. And this is important for the politicians and for the people that are talking about which is the main aspect that we need to take, which are the main actions that we need to take in order to have more water for future, new lands and so on. And this is a topic, it's a crucial topic in Chile, to me, at least. And the other thing that finally you mentioned about the irrigation water, management, or there are like, you mentioned that there are a lot of agencies in Chile. What do you believe about one unique agency or some state agency, or like it's in a framework in a directory, water systems, like it's in Europe? How is your advice to what to do in order to regulate all this type of analysis, with the several agencies related with water, instead of one or two, or one per region, or one per basin, or something like this? My experience, I think so we need to take more basin analysis instead to more regional or about country, all the countries, because each basin is different under different conditions. And in order to transfer water, like in California, you need to know very well how is the future development of each basin, and what will be the future actions in each basin in order to know if we have enough water to transfer to another areas, and so on. In such a case, it's important to consider some aspect that you mentioned here that was crucial. The aspect that you explained in your presentation, that give us more incentive to work in different aspects, like we are doing in the CRIAM. This is my main aspect that I can explain, or related with the talking that you are, Diego. I don't know if you continues with him too.
Well, I with all your points, Eduardo. I mean, I think there's no this. You make some good points over there. Obviously, also the point you make about water use efficiency. I mean, you're correct. I mean, if the farmer, if they save water, they're not going to give it away. They're going to do something else with it, and so they might even expand irrigation. Okay, so the efficiency in that way is not efficient for the region. Of course, the other aspect is which in addition to that is, when you can be very efficient with water in irrigated situation, but as a result of it, you don't leach to the groundwater. So there's a lot of pumping, removing groundwater storage. And yet, if you don't bring water back in, you're depleting the groundwater. The older, less efficient systems actually did that by definition, because they wanted to leach, they wanted to bring excess water be less efficient. So there would actually be leaching of salts and so on, and that would then replenish the groundwater. Yeah. So, and then your last comment on the basin management aspects of how to deal with that. And so I'm not familiar, of course, as you are with all the different agencies and ministries, but I do remember there is so many different agencies and also, you know, ministries that are somehow have something to say about water management. So yeah, the solution would be is to, and that's maybe my other point, is put the politics a little bit aside, although you need to have a stick, and that's where regulation comes in, but is to think more in terms of, you know, who are the stakeholders, whatever your basin is, you know, what do they want to achieve collectively? And so the way that this working, it seems to work in California with this nitrate, but also even with the groundwater recharge, is to include all the stakeholders and build coalitions. And so they have no legislative power, but, you know, these coalitions, they all, you know, they all want to reach, you know, have the same goal. They want to have a healthy life. They want to have a good livelihood. They want to be productive. They want to be safe. They want to have clean water. And so whether you are a mining company or you are a farmer or you are in, you know, you live in the city, you know, we all want to have this, you know, the same end goal. So, but that's a process. That's not something that just happens. And yeah, I'm not an expert. I just take what I read, I hear from others, and my involvement, how this could potentially work. But it's really a shift. I mean, so because I think in terms of Chile, the politics and all these different agencies are in the way of actually doing something.
Mm-hmm.
Professor Hopsapfel, do you want to say something else?
No, I think so that this is the main things that I am looking to share with Jan, but maybe in next time there are another topics that we can discuss, depending on your question too, and so on. Go ahead, Diego.
Yeah, I think we have a couple of minutes. I would like to say that transdisciplinarity is a key issue here because we have to integrate not only the physical aspects of water, but also the institutional landscape, the power asymmetries. At the end, we need to move from a very physical geography approach to a more socio-hydrological approach, including communities, but also starting to implement more bottom-up approaches. Up to now, most of the conversation in terms of regulation in Chile, it's related to that, to regulation, to institutions. It's like, okay, if we change the law, we will be able to do everything good from here, but there is a lot of capacities we need to build. There is a lot of science we need to develop. There is a lot of technology we must implement at the fields and in order to really achieve water security. Just before going for the question from the viewers, I must say that in some way we are lost in the way the government could fund the research we need to do, especially because still we have a very high standard metrics to fund research, but sometimes it's we need this holistic approach. So my question, Professor Hoffman, is if you were part of an international advisory panel for the National Research Agency, what will be your advice in terms of funding focus or funding schemes to better use the capacities we already have at the country level?
Okay, so your question, I think if I have it right, is if I would advise your government
Yeah.
It's a nationwide issue. You are in a dilemma. You don't, one does not have a clear path on how to move forward. How would you define a path to move forward, say in the next 10 years, okay? Because again, you have to think in long term, I think, because things are not changing very rapidly. Well, if you remember my last few slides, and the report, what I call the nitrate report, that really elucidates the issue, and it caused a lot of commotion, okay, for the various stakeholders involved in terms of they are contaminating, in this case, the groundwater. So to have measurements, to have data, okay, that allows you, to whoever it is, to make convincing arguments that in fact things need to change. And then the question is, what paths would that be to make that change? But first, everybody needs to be convinced that something has to change, and there has to be solid data that supports that indeed things need to change. To have a central agency, we have them in California. We have a regulatory agency and we have more a management agency, and they work side by side. So it's more the carrot one and the stick one. Okay, so the regulatory one is the stick one. The management agency is the facilitating one. Is to I think I would advise to look at the basin scale. You have your 15 basins or some, equivalent basins, including those in the south, okay? Because that transfer seems like an obvious solution. It's going to be costly, but if you as a country, decide you need to have that water for whatever reason, whether it's for sanitation, drinking water, or for irrigation, or for mining, then the water, you have it. It just has to move. So it's to basically have a consensus building, I would almost say exercise, but it's really spent some years to develop that data, that report, and discuss it, and remove the competition part, so that needs to go away, because it has to be something that everybody understands and is agrees with, So anyway, that would be my short
advice. We have a couple of questions from people on the streaming. There are a couple of questions regarding some
wastewater
new sources. So in some way, because in some way the environment, in the landscape, the institutional landscape, there is an idea that most of the problem could be solved just getting more water into the productive sector and not really going to the main problem, to the core problem. But what do you think about those?
Right.
This approach, but also some specific approaches like groundwater recharge, artificial groundwater recharge, wastewater reuse, rain harvesting, and things like that.
Well, these are all very valuable suggestions, but again, it's not one golden egg, right? So depending on where you are, there are different options. But I do want to comment for sure on those related to wastewater, treated wastewater, and desalinization. I mean, particularly in arid countries like Saudi Arabia or Israel, these are enormous sources of water. For example, in Israel, 25% of the water comes from desalinized water. Treated wastewater is 40 to 50% of all the water used in agriculture. So this is how and it becomes competitive because it's used for high value crops. But there are significant issues that come along with either treated wastewater or desalinized seawater. And for seawater, we know they have this toxic waste that that comes along with it, and it's very high energy required. So these are the negatives of desalinized water. Treated wastewater, the problem with it is it still has high amounts of typically sodium, chloride, some trace elements, pharmaceuticals. Here it talks about micropollutants. So it's in there that could really destroy the soil and could be a safety hazard. Okay, it will be toxic to the plant. So one of the things that they're doing in Israel is actually blending the wastewater with desalinized seawater. Okay, so you get a mix of the two that seems to be a better option. Okay, so you treat the wastewater and then you desalinize it and then make it a source for fresh water. The other thing in terms of technologies, in Israel particularly, they are working on a way to not remove all the ions or pollutants, but just be very specific. So particularly have technologies that would remove the chloride and the sodium. And these are the ones that are toxic to both the plant and soil. And so use the, implement these type of technologies that would actually not have these negative impacts. So treatment of wastewater, yes, but studies have really shown that if you just use wastewater without removing some of these other ions, treated wastewater in the long term is not the solution. Okay, we have to be very careful, but you need to have studies from 5-10 years or longer to really find that out. Rainwater harvesting, yeah, you still need water. You need rain, okay? So yes, certain countries in desert environments, if there is no water, rainwater harvesting helps, but it's really very small for most situations. And then for cities, yes. So yeah, this is part of the solution in the city environment. If you can build underground tanks that, if it rains, you collect it. So when there's a drought, you can actually irrigate your backyard with that. Makes a lot of sense, and it allows for people involvement, the public involvement in being part of the solution. Okay, so it's relatively easy to do if you want to do it, and then the government could promote that and maybe subsidize some of those. Yeah, I think that I addressed most of these questions there.
Yeah. So the last one is it's about how do you think we can achieve water security under these extreme drought conditions? Do you think it is possible to talk about water security when we are under a water siege in some way from the climate?
Well, Diego, climate change is the new normal. You can't ignore it. So whatever you need to take into consideration flooding and droughts. We're experiencing, well, both countries, you have the same. Sometimes you have these extreme rainfall events and you have the flooding happening and then you have these droughts. So whatever you when you start considering and thinking about planning, you that has to be a significant part of the planning. You need to think about resilience to these unusual events. So you cannot depend on the average water availability, because that average water availability might have nothing to do with the reality. So you have to think about highs and lows. And so building storage somehow, so that's why the groundwater recharge comes in. I remember one of the questions was about that. So agriculture recharge. So we call it groundwater banking. So which is a very nice application of that. So what it does, if it's successful, okay, so if there's excess rainfall, potentially causing flooding, you build an infrastructure that allows to store that excess water, and you bank it, say in the groundwater. So when there is a drought, you can actually pump it from the groundwater without depleting the groundwater resource. So you have two, some would compare surface water and groundwater as two banking accounts, a checking account and a savings account. The surface water storage is the checking account. You use it, all the time. The groundwater savings account. So that is, if there is an issue, if you have a shortage, then you start pulling from your savings account. So that's an example that possibly could work. But there are other issues associated with that. And it could be, you have to have an infrastructure that allows you to do that for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so there is no more question for the public, but Don Eduardo, do you want to say final remarks for this, or?
No, but only to give the thanks for the nice talking and your view about the situation of water and irrigation and water management and everything like this, that gave us certain advice, and as well as was always when you are in the community of our research center, that and will be nice always your advice in order to put all the comments related to new researchers and what will be the future actions that we need to do to solve the problems, like you mentioned now, for our researchers and our students and the people in Chile. Thank you anyway, that was taking your time, and was very, very, very nice to talk with you again via these virtual systems. This gives us the situation that we are closer together, but still far away, but closer.
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you, Jan, for your talking and your presentation. This is only that I can say, Dr. Rivera, now for me, from my side.
Thank you.
Jan, any final remarks?
No, I don't. I think I really appreciate being part of this. I've been part with you for about 10 years, I think, close to, working with some of you, and then of course I'm part of CREAM as well. So it's really a pleasure to work with you all and maybe make some advice that helps you as an institution, but also as a country, because I can, regarding water, you're a little behind. In the past they built all these projects, and so we're still having issues, obviously, but in Chile that didn't happen, and so how to now correct for that is not a simple way. It's not simple. I can see that.
Okay, just before saying goodbye to everyone, I would like to say that there is a lot of room here for thinking out of the box and to propose new and innovative solutions for the water scarcity and water security. But I think as you have been commenting on this webinar, it is really important to have a kind of path, a path forward, and we need to put all the people all together define what is the kind of regulation and the kind of country we want to have during the next years, because in that way we will be able to put the funds, the research, and the well-being in the same place. So it's a political issue, I think, and it is really important to have these kind of webinars to show that capacities and knowledge are already in place, but we need to some small patch to move forward. So thanks to everyone who has been watching this webinar, and also thanks so much for to Professor Hodmans and to Professor Hopsafel. It's very nice to be here and to be part of this panel, and I hope we will have the chance to meet again during the next years. So goodbye to everyone, and